Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived an old woman. She was very old, with silver hair and a face full of wrinkles, but her eyes were bright and full of kindness. Despite her age, the old lady always smiled, and everyone in the village loved her. She lived alone in a small house near a big banyan tree. Her husband had passed away many years ago, and she had no children. But she never complained about her life. She spent her days sitting under the tree, smiling and greeting everyone who passed by. The villagers had difficult lives. Some were farmers, others worked as carpenters, and many sold goods in the market. Life was not easy for them. Sometimes the rain wouldn't come, and the crops would dry up. Other times, people would fall ill and couldn't work. Many of the villagers were sad and worried, but the old lady's smile never faded. One day, a young woman named Priya came to see the old lady. Her face was wet with tears, and her voice trembled as she spoke, "Grandma, I don't know what to do. My husband went to the city to find work, but he hasn't sent us any money. My children are hungry, and I'm afraid something bad has happened to him." The old lady looked at Priya with her gentle eyes and smiled softly. "Sit down, my child," she said, patting the ground beside her. "Tell me, what do you think will happen?" Priya wiped her tears with the edge of her sari and said, "I don't know, Grandma. Everything feels wrong. What if my husband can't find work? What if he forgets about us? What if we have nothing to eat?" The old lady listened patiently and then spoke, "Priya, when we focus only on bad things, our hearts feel heavy, and everything seems worse. But when we think good thoughts, our hearts feel lighter, and sometimes, good things begin to happen." Priya looked at her doubtfully. "How can I think good thoughts when everything around me is bad?" The old lady smiled and began to tell a story. Once, there was a poor man who had nothing. He had no food, no money, and no family. One day, he sat by a river, crying. An old woman passing by saw him and stopped. She asked him, "Why are you crying, my son?" The man said, "I have nothing. How can I ever be happy?" The old woman smiled and said, "You have the river, which flows endlessly. You have the trees, which give shade and fruit. You have the sun, which warms you every day. Look around you, there is beauty everywhere. If you only think about what you don't have, you will always be sad. But if you think about what you do have, you will find peace." The man listened to her carefully, and slowly, he stopped crying. He began to see the beauty around him, the river, the trees, and the bright sun. He felt better, and from that day on, he worked hard, and his life began to change. The old lady turned to Priya and said, "You see, my dear, the man's life didn't change because of magic. It changed because he changed the way he thought. When we think positive thoughts, we find the strength to face our problems. But when we focus only on what is wrong, we feel weak and hopeless." Priya looked at the old lady, a bit more hopeful. "Will my thinking really make a difference?" The old lady nodded and said, "Yes, my child. If you wake up every morning and tell yourself, 'Today will be a good day,' you will find the strength to care for your children and face whatever comes your way. But if you keep thinking about what might go wrong, you will feel sad and unable to act." Priya wiped her tears and smiled. "I understand, Grandma. I will try to think good thoughts from now on." The old lady smiled warmly. "That is the first step, my dear." From that day on, Priya started to follow the old lady's advice. Every morning, she told herself, "Today will be a good day." She worked hard, took care of her children, and waited for her husband with hope in her heart. A few weeks later, Priya received a letter from her husband. He had found work in the city and was sending money home. Priya ran to the old lady's house, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "Grandma, you were right," she said. "My husband found a job, and everything is better now." The old lady smiled and said, "You see, my dear, when we think positively, we invite good things into our lives. Problems will always come, but if we face them with hope, we can overcome them. The old lady's wisdom spread across the village. Many people came to her for advice, and she always told them the same thing: think good thoughts, and good things will follow. The villagers began to see the power of her words, and slowly, their lives became brighter.